Greetings from the underworld. Carl Cactus Warmith here on episode 2 of Thinker Stinker, where guests bring one movie that makes them think and one they say stinks. We got a real goodie for you today. The Thinker is Peter Watkins' 1971 pseudo-documentary Punishment Park, in which arrested draft dodgers and hippie types are given two options: either lengthy jail sentences or a 50-mile run through the Californian desert with foaming-at-the-mouth cops in tow. The Stinker is Charlie Kaufman's 2020 Netflix film I'm Thinking of Ending Things, following a woman who goes with her boyfriend to her parents' house and notices reality starting to collapse. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy. All right. I'd like to introduce my longtime friend, cinephile with style, the Letterboxd legend, Scott McRae. How's it going, Scott?
So good. How are you, my dude?
I'm doing well. I just watched your Thinker, Punishment Park, made quite the impression.
It's so divisive in terms of what it's saying. I mean, it's such a deliberately Marxist, revolutionary piece of work that I'm sure if you're an American critic, you're like, where now?
Yeah, it's inescapable, especially if you were pro-war in the 70s, which to me is an unimaginable position. But
yeah, it's cool being pro-genocide, I guess. I mean, that's...
Yeah, the Vietnam War is pretty indefensible. I think probably a big part of the resistance, too, is that it's a British director. If there's one thing Americans despise, it's, the English telling them what to do. We have a bit of a relationship with that.
Very true. And in addition to that, he's also fiercely intellectual, which I do not want to rustle any American feathers, but we do have a tendency to be rather anti-intellectual, especially in the filmmaking landscape.
What, is it all that beer drinking on porches that makes you think that?
Mainly Forrest Gump.
Yeah, Forrest Gump could do it. So I wonder, I think a lot of his characters are fiercely intellectual too, now that you say that, especially during the trials, where the convicted will go on long, articulate rants on everything that's wrong, and then everybody on the board just kind of has this like visceral "fuck you, shut him up, get him out of here" reaction. So what do you make of that?
Definitely, and I think Hannah Arendt actually has this really great passage in On Revolution where she talks about one of the biggest dangers to American democracy was our initial destruction of the town hall meeting. That one of the first things we did was like, we're going to only have representatives, and I think Watkins really captures how much madness would go on in a town hall meeting in America, because
I got a cop straight eyeballing me right now.
Really?
Yeah, it's so appropriate. I just parked in front of a church to record this because of the cement truck across the street, and I feel like I'm like seconds away from being given the option of Punishment Park or prison.
Wow, that is too ironic. That's horrible. That's so scary.
Yeah, I guess I'll pull up to another spot. Hold on, let's put this on pause for a sec. Hopefully we're good this time.
This is the one, baby. I feel it.
I feel it too. Failing any airstrikes in my vicinity.
Just the mention of Peter Watkins will get you killed in these parts.
Why does Peter Watkins' Punishment Park make you think, Scott?
Okay, well, Peter Watkins is arguably, in my less than humble opinion, he is probably one of the most important filmmakers who's ever lived. I mean, he has pushed the narrative film form and the fiction film form in such a way that is so important in his docudramas that he creates these fictional landscapes and sometimes not fictional landscapes, like for Culloden and La Commune and Edvard Munch. He actually went back in time and fictionalized these accounts and filmed as if there were cameras in 1871. And it's a brilliant idea. It baffles me that it took that long in film's lifetime for someone to think, oh, we could do this. But it just shows how limited the film form is, which he does talk about in his book, Media Crisis, that there's a monoform, he believes, in film culture, that we only really think about film one way, and we only really shoot films one way, and they're usually meant for, we have a beginning and end and a narrative, and there's also many Oedipal narratives and stuff like that I think is it's hard to deny Freud's presence in film history, and that is markedly influenced. But Punishment Park has none of that. Punishment Park is an audacious, loud, angry, unique film.
Yeah, I was reading about Watkins' influence on John Lennon, actually, and he sent him a letter, a long-winded letter saying, hey, you're fucking John Lennon. You got to take some responsibility. You got to be political. And John's interpretation is, oh, I guess we'll be peaceful then. Like,
Oh yeah, he was like, all you need is love, man. And I
yeah,
was like, shut the fuck up. I was like, I don't think that's what Watkins is saying.
I don't know why my John Lennon impersonation is just a softer version of my Charles Bronson impersonation, but it
They're
is.
very close. I was about to say, mine's only the Dewey Cox, Jason Schwartzman.
Yeah, I mean, you have to get like the nasal quality, but it's hard. And the only British accent I can do is like I'm afraid I'll lose my job. Stop putting me. That's the only one I can do. All right, so honestly, for me, the voiceover saying what the temperature is, that might be the most haunting part because you feel it, especially as some desert kids. You really feel it when he says it's
100%.
109 degrees outside. The film gets hotter. I get stuffier watching it.
It's remarkable. I mean, it is a sweaty, gross film. And the fact that it's a fiction film, I mean, it's by the end, I'm almost swept up and I don't recall that it's fiction at all. Like, especially when he's talking to the cops at the end. And I mean, the way he instigates himself in the narrative and being this like documentarian who's like very much like pressing them. He's like, what you're doing here is wrong. And they're like, the danger is felt, even though it's a fiction narrative. I'm like, are they going to kill this documentarian? I mean, it reminds me of Harlan County, USA, which is an actual documentary where Barbara Koppel was shot at for what she was doing.
I thought he might have been killed. That didn't seem like a stretch for the movie.
Not at all, especially with kind of the bloodlust depicted in the cops at the end. I mean, especially hearing them justify what they were doing, and especially in that era when Vietnam was like kind of in its final days, it really rings true for like the just following orders thing and like this kind of like, and not more than just following orders, the ideological hoops and acrobatics one must go through in order to like articulate themselves that way and be that level of evil and this entity of like destruction and oppression. I mean, it's a contortion of the human soul that is so hard to watch, especially juxtaposed with the town hall meetings, and you have them being like, do you think, I wrote my favorite quotes down here. Do you think my language is immoral? What do you call that shit you just did, man? What do you call that shit here? Like it's crazy. Like they are just intellectual pacifists. And it reminds me also of, to go to Cambodia a little bit when the Khmer Rouge took over and killed the intellectuals, they killed homosexuals. I mean, the fact that was a condemnation from the American standpoint. What do we do here in America? You know what I mean? We were just talking about this before we started recording. What would have happened if the people who raided the Capitol building yesterday were Marxist communists or Leninists? You know what I mean? Like, they would have been shot immediately. They would have been called terrorists by the media. They would have been called dissenters of American democracy. What the fuck are these guys, you know?
There was another time where the lead guy says, "What, are you on vacation all the time?" And later compares it to a picnic. And it made me think of all the language and all the rhetoric we have, maybe particularly in American English, about productivity and efficiency, such as this idea of free time, right? Where like that's a thing you can have. Apparently, there's time that isn't free. I mean, like I think not even implicit, the explicit suggestion that when you're at work you're enslaved. It's really about nationalism too, which is another reason why I think so many American critics received it poorly. Because we really don't want an Englishman telling us about nationalism, especially our nationalism.
Definitely. And it's one of those things where Watkins, too, I think it's almost convenient that he's labeled as an Englishman for American critics because he's actually very transnational. I mean, he lived in Deutschland, Canada, Lithuania. Like, he's been all over the place. You know what I mean? Like, so it's one of those things where it feels like it's convenient to immediately oppose him as this, like, enemy when, like, the English state has, like, in the last 100 years does not resemble at all the colonial empire that it once was. I mean, it's got problems all its own, the Thatcher era, the kind of current, anti-socialism regime. It's got its own issues and its own problems, just like we do. But I think it's very easy for critics to write him off because he's an English filmmaker.
I don't know. It's really the definition of, making a lot with a little. I mean, this film had almost no budget. And it's all pretty much non-professional actors or amateur actors. And it works entirely. It packs such a punch.
Seriously. I mean, the fact that it's also non-actors is like one of my favorite things about it. Like I encourage and implore all youth filmmakers out there, take a risk on non-actors. Like, we need more of them. You know what I mean? Unless your name's Roger Corman and you have a love affair with Vincent Price and you can have him in everything you're in, go for some non-actors. Take a risk.
So your stinker was Charlie Kaufman's I'm Thinking of Ending Things, 2020, a contemporary release.
Yes.
Scott, clearly you don't like it.
I actively despise this movie. It is one of the worst movies that came out in the year of a bunch of horrible movies. And okay, so first of all, I guess I'll get away with like the intellectual ballyhoo first. Like, Kaufman is one of the preeminent American filmmakers to deal with the work of Friedrich Nietzsche. I mean, briefly explaining the eternal recurrence, that like Nietzsche has this idea that like a demon will steal you in your loneliest lonely and tell you that you have to live your life over and over and over again. And Nietzsche's whole philosophy was trying to overcome that idea of that being a sad thing. I mean, he spent most of his life sick and alone. And Kaufman, who, if I'm going to interpret anything from his films, has also spent most of his life sick and alone, reckons often with the idea of the eternal recurrence being a painful thing. And Eternal Sunshine, I mean, spoilers here, the final shot of them repeating it again and again and again is very symbolic of that. And Synecdoche is another great work of that, but is much more of a work of like profound cinematic solipsism. And I'm thinking of Ending Things as kind of birthed out of that same solipsistic attitude, and in a much more grating and infuriating fashion. It is like getting so close to Charlie Kaufman's mind that you start thinking of ending things.
Yeah, I agree with so much you said. There's a kind of split expectations I had for this movie, right? So on one end is Charlie Kaufman, who has proven himself as a very, very good scriptwriter. Being John Malkovich is very funny and very meta
So
and
good.
very good. And Eternal Sunshine is better than that. And his directorial debut, Synecdoche, is better than either.
It's a masterpiece.
It's a great movie. One of my favorite movies of the 2000s. And so that's one end. And then the other end is, Netflix movie. And if there is one studio that is just so good at wrecking established, good directors' careers, or not even necessarily careers, but guaranteed to collaborate on a stinker, it's Netflix. I mean, Netflix made a horrible David Fincher movie this year. They made a mediocre Martin Scorsese movie last year. And then this is, I will say that Mank is a worse movie than I'm Thinking of Ending Things. But this movie is very, very frustrating. It doesn't work as a movie at all. It's trying to be a mindfuck and falls well short. I think the practice of being in a dark car for almost 25 straight minutes with barely anything breaking it up, and you can't really discern anything, is on the screen one of the ugliest things I've ever seen.
Without question, one of the I mean, and so aesthetically, I think you really are getting at the aesthetics of this film. They are shot in this almost what I will call the A24 in-house style, where everything looks like a Urban Outfitters Polaroid picture, and it is just so awful to look at. I mean, it is the whole time. It's in this grading aspect ratio to make it like artsy, and it's a tough thing to look at. Like, it is, I seriously, like, there's not a lot of frames in that movie that stick out to me, but there's that one frame of the overhead shot of the car pulling in, and I'm like, okay, I get what you're trying to do, and it's not working. It is just so lame and trite and tired, I guess, in so many different ways.
It doesn't work. You need to give us something to look at as film fans. That's what we want. I mean, yeah, we like thinking. I named my podcast Thinker Stinker. Obviously, we like thinking from fucking movies, but we also like movies. We like things to move. We like to look at something. We need the visual, and this lacks the visual grotesquely. Now, the other thing is the narrative, which I think is incredibly creepy.
Yes, the narrative... Yeah, I mean, the fact... Okay, so huge spoilers here for I'm Thinking of Ending Things. The narrative takes place entirely in the mind of an old janitor who is thinking of ending things, casting his gaze out over his whole life, basically thinking, I should have just died in that moment. It would have been better for me to die and never have lived my life. in 2020, it doesn't play well. It's one of those things that I had this story come out in 1985. I'm sure critics everywhere would have been like, oh, yes, this is what it is to be an old man. Because critics were only old men.
Yeah, it's like, we get it, Charlie Kaufman. You're an old man, and you feel bad about that, and you're sad. All right?
You're sad. And
What's
some of the...
next? You're one of the most privileged people in Hollywood. You're one of the few people who gets appreciation for being a screenwriter. Nobody gets that. Nobody.
I was thinking about your, you did a Charlie Kaufman ranked thing, and I was like, what other screenwriter gets the auteur quality of having like a ranked list?
Not a soul. Not a soul. I can't name you one other person who gets that.
Aging is hard. And obviously aging's hard. Like, as someone who has a degenerative mental illness and also has abused drugs throughout their life, aging is very difficult. Like, you start to look at things and be like, oh my God, is that a thing that I fucked up? Like, it sucks. It's really brutal. However, and those parts sometimes work for me. Like the whole, actually the sequence at the house, the first time I watched it did work for me. That 20-minute sequence has a lot to do with Toni Collette and her performance, but I thought the movie was going to end there. And had the movie ended there, I'd probably give this sucker like a 6 out of 10 instead of like the abysmal like 2 out of 10 that it sits at right now.
All right. Any final thoughts on I'm thinking of ending things before we think of ending things?
Oh man. Oh, I mean, if you're gonna be one of these people who likes this movie right now, I would strongly implore you to watch more movies. Same thing with anyone who likes Interstellar or like thinks they can be a Rotten Tomato critic when their favorite movies are The Shining, Interstellar, Pulp Fiction. Like, go do something with your life. Like, watch actual movies, go read books, go ahead, talk to people who aren't like Instagram people. Like, delete your Instagram. Like, burn a building down. Like, do something real with your fucking life.
All right. Well, after you imploring people to burn buildings down, you're surely being sent to Punishment Park. Scott,
Sent to Punishment Park.
I'd like to thank you for hopping on this podcast. You are a great guest, as expected, and I'm sure you'll be returning to Thinker Stinker.
I would love to be here anytime, my guy. It's been so much fun.
And there it is, another Thinker Stinker, and another episode where I was in agreement with the guest. Punishment Park really is worth a watch, people. It's a deeply political, deeply important film that stings as sharply today as it likely did in the 70s. Our greed-fueled, warmongering machine is broken, and broken bad. I wish I could call this movie's vision of the American criminal justice system absurd or surreal, but it's painfully realistic. A country that incarcerates so much of its population and leaves prisoners in outdoor cages till they literally burn to death needs to see this. But I'm thinking of ending things? Nothing worthwhile there. Do yourself a favor, and if you haven't already, go watch Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and Synecdoche, New York, back when Charlie Kaufman had it going on. Hopefully he can come back from this dud in his disappointing debut novel, Aunt Kind. I still have confidence in him, but shit, I hope his antidepressants start working better. The Roadrunners are rattling outside, folks, and I better run before they get me. Peace out.